Hi everybody, Peggy McGuire here for English 104 Technical Writing. Welcome back. Today's topic is going to be effective use of document design and visuals in technical writing. Now, what I'm going to offer here is just a very broad overview of how important document design and visuals are in the communication of your message when you are writing technical materials. So the reason I'm going to stay broad is because your textbook does a wonderful job of discussing these issues in detail and giving you lots and lots and lots of examples and illustrations of the different kinds of visual information that I'm going to be talking about. So I strongly suggest that as you listen to and watch this presentation, that you have your textbook open to chapters 12 and 13. So you will be able to see numerous examples of what I'm talking about in the textbook and really spend some time on those chapters 12 and 13. They really are rich in information. So do have it open. Get it now if you need a minute to go get your book and open to chapter 12, and we'll get started. So let's talk first about visuals in general and why visuals matter in a technical document that you're writing. What you want visuals to do when and if you include them is you want the picture to focus and organize your reader on the most important information that you are trying to convey. So the whole point of getting people's visual attention is to tell them this is what you need to pay attention to. This is the most important stuff. And if you're doing a good job on your end, you're making that most important information easier to understand quickly. That's what those visuals are doing for you and for your audience, is to make what you consider to be most important as easy to understand as quickly as possible. So that's what you want your visuals to do. And finally, using visuals allows you to send your message more efficiently than the text itself can. So this is one of your decision points as the author of a technical document, is that to decide, given the purpose of your message, what you want to say, what information you want to convey, can I convey it better, more efficiently, by using some kind of visual information than by the text on its own? This is especially critical is if the information you are trying to convey includes a lot of long lists of facts, lists of figures, lists of numbers. They can just deaden your reader. Dense text of any kind, but especially long lists, can just, think about your own reaction when you're looking at a text and it's extremely dense. It includes a lot of information in long lists. You're going to just zone out, and you don't want your reader to zone out. So, can a visual help me to keep the reader focused even when the information is dense? That's when I can send my message more efficiently by using a visual than by the text on its own. So those are the ways, those are the things you're thinking about when you're thinking about what visuals will work here. And speaking of purposes, then, you have to be really clear on what kind of information you're trying to convey and what you're trying to accomplish in conveying that information, because every type of visual information serves a different purpose. You're giving people different ways of seeing information, different perspectives from which your reader will be able to understand the information that you're conveying. So, if that's the case, then different kinds of visuals are going to help you convey different kinds of information. So you, as the author, need to decide what kind of visual is going to most efficiently, most clearly, best convey the information I'm trying to convey. So, for instance, and this is where, look in chapter 12 for lots of examples of some of these different kinds of visual information. There are tables. If you have a lot of data that you need to convey and you're trying to do it in the most efficient way possible, one way to do that is to organize the data in columns and rows. That's what we call a table. So if you look in chapter 12, you'll see examples of data charts, and you'll see how they organize information across a number of columns and down rows. Okay? On the other hand, if you're dealing with numbers, numeric information, and you want to give your reader an alternative way of seeing those numbers and seeing how those numbers relate to each other, that's when we try to sort of turn those numbers into pictures by using graphs. That's what graphs really are. Graphs are numeric information in pictorial form. So they give numbers shapes and patterns. And if that's what you're doing, if that's the kind of information you are trying to convey, you're going to use graphs to try to show how those numbers work in shapes and patterns. All right. Again, look at chapter 12 for some examples. Are you going to use information in which you need to show relationships? And you need to show relationships among your pieces of information by doing things like using arrows. One thing leads to another. Using lines. This happens first and this happens next. Using some kinds of patterns that are geometric. That's where you're going to create a chart in which to organize that information using things like lines and arrows and other kinds of geometric patterns. Okay. And then the whole world of graphic illustration, which actually are pictures of things. And this, especially in some of your earlier writing assignments, you're going to really want to pay attention to illustrations of what you're talking about. Pictures, photographs, drawings, figures. We use lots of different names for what we're talking about. They're all basically pictures of what you're talking about. Okay. So those are just some of the kinds of visuals that you might use depending on what kind of information you're conveying and what you want to say about that information. So, if I've got different kinds of visuals, depending on what kind of information I'm conveying and what I want to say about it, here are the questions I'm going to ask myself when I'm deciding what visuals to use. First of all, we always start with purpose, of course, and it goes back again to what do I as the author want to do? What am I trying to accomplish by conveying this information? Am I trying to convey facts and figures? Am I trying to show the parts of a thing, of something larger? Am I trying to give directions? Based on the answer to that question, what am I trying to accomplish? What do I need to do? I'm going to choose what visual is going to get me there. All right. Then the second question, as always, is audience. I've thought about what I want to accomplish. Now I want to think about who I'm talking to. And how, for instance, how expert my audience is going to be in the topic that I'm addressing. So, if you are addressing experts in a field that you are dealing with, those people may appreciate and want to look at complex visuals that they are able to interpret themselves. Right? So if you are sharing information with someone who has a good deal of expertise, they're going to be able to interpret things on their own without too much support from you. So you can give those people more complex visuals and know that they will sort of tear them apart and figure them out. All right? However, if you are shooting for a general audience, and remember we talked about general audience, sort of the common users of things who may or may not have a lot of understanding or familiarity with what you're describing, if that's who your audience is, then you're going to keep your visuals more basic and to really go back to that purpose of directing your audience's focus, telling your audience what's most important. So you're keeping your visual basic and you're really using that visual to focus your audience's attention on what you think is the most important part of the information and the data that you're sharing. All right? So, big difference between how you approach experts versus novices in any field. And then also there's the additional question here is if you have had an opportunity to communicate with your audience in the past, have they expressed a preference? Has the people you're trying to reach already said they would like to keep it simple, or they'd like to have something more comprehensive and more complex? If they've already told you that, then you can be guided by that information. All right? And then, once you've thought about your purpose and your audience, you make your choice. Which form of visual will best communicate the message I want to send? Is this a time where a line graph will show how growth in the number of pounds and tons of trash are being funneled into the oceans right now over the past 10 years? Then you want a line graph. Are you simply trying to show that year by year the amounts have increased? There you might have a table. It's really, you are thinking about what do I want to communicate and what's the best form of visual to communicate that. But what is true for all visuals, no matter which ones you choose, in your text you must do the following things. If you incorporate a visual, you must give each visual a number and a title. So, figure 1 and a title. Figure 2 and a title. Every visual gets a number and a title. And the numbers obviously have to be sequential through your text. Okay? So 1, 2, 3 in sequential order. Alright? So, number and title for each visual. Each visual needs to be presented cleanly and so that it is easy to see, easy to read, easy to understand. There is nothing more frustrating than a visual that I can't see because it's smudged, because it's too, the print is too light, because it's too small. This happens a lot. Think about your audience. If you can't see what the visual says, then your audience is not going to be able to see it. So make sure that it's clean and easy to read, or else don't include it, because it only serves to confuse and frustrate your audience instead of helping your audience understand. Okay? If what you've got is a fairly complex visual, you're going to have to label all of its parts and use legends if needed. Remember, what we mean by legends are little explanations, right? Little explanations of all the parts. So if what you're describing is a machine that has several parts, you're going to have to get yourself a visual that clearly labels all those parts, and if necessary defines them, gives additional information in the form of a legend. All right. Now, I've talked about this before, but I will say it again because it bears repeating. If you're going to use visual information, those visuals need to be placed near the text that they are meant to help explain. All right? If you put a visual elsewhere, it's not going to make any sense to the reader. So once again, you end up confusing rather than clarifying. So make sure that if you're using visuals, that they are placed in your text as close as possible to the actual text that they refer to, that they are supposed to be there to explain. All right? And finally, you must cite your sources. This, you'll hear this over and over again when we talk about your text. And once you start doing any kind of research that requires you to use outside sources of information, where we will talk about the importance of acknowledging that it's outside information and saying, who wrote this? Where did you get this information? Well, the same is true of any kind of visual information. You must cite your sources. You must say where this graph came from if you did not create it yourself. All right, that would be the only time when this is not true, is if you actually created it yourself. Then you don't need to cite it as an outside source. Otherwise, always acknowledge where your visuals come from. Okay? Now, we've talked about ethics before, and we're going to talk about them again, and we'll probably talk about them again in the future. There are ethical considerations that technical writers need to address when using visual information, just as much as writing textual information. Here is the fact, and our current climate should tell us this very, very clearly. Even if information is accurate, literally accurate, it can be distorted. People can use information, the same information, to create all sorts of different kinds of opinions. All right? So we have to be careful. This is what we call spin, right? You can have information that is literally accurate, and yet what you are saying with that information may not be true. Now that's a tricky thing to get around, because people do it a lot. All right? 3 people using the same information can come to 3 different conclusions about it. So we really, as the authors, but also as the consumers of such information, have to really be aware that misrepresentation is possible. And then as the authors of technical writing, we pledge ourselves to be ethical and to avoid misrepresentation of data with visuals. So I am not going to use visuals to distort the meaning of the information. I am using the visuals to clarify the meaning of the information. So what that means in real life, as I am writing, as I am choosing and incorporating visuals into my text, I want to make sure that I include all necessary data. By necessary, I mean all the information that my reader will need to fully understand here. Okay? So I include all necessary data. I never selectively omit essential information. I do not omit information that does not agree with me. I be honest and say there is conflicting information here. All right? This is how you create believability. If you want your audience to believe that you are an honest broker, that you are a reliable source, then you cannot selectively omit information that is essential and yet may not completely agree with the point you're trying to make. You have to be honest about it. Okay? So present all the necessary data and hope that your reader is able to understand what you're doing, because you're doing such a good job of presenting it. All right. Make sure that the visual relationships that you're creating accurately reflect the relationships in the information. All right. So when I look at the visual, it's honestly representing what the text says. Right? It's clearly giving me another way to understand the same meaning as I've put into the information that I'm communicating to you. All right. So it doesn't conflict with, and this may seem obvious, but the fact is I have had to tell students that I'm looking at the graph you included here, and it seems to me that the information on the graph is conflicting with what you're saying in your argument. So you really do have to be careful that when you use a graphic or visual piece of information, that it actually says what you think it says, and that what it says supports the information that you're conveying in your text. All right, so take care with that. And and then that goes the other way too. Be sure that the information you're presenting in your text supports the conclusions that you're implying by adding these visuals. All right. I mean, obviously, I hope obviously, a lot of what I'm saying here is especially relevant when you are trying to convince someone to do something or to believe something. But it's distortion can happen even in when you're trying to show somebody how to build something. You really need to make sure that even in that case, that what your graphic says is what your text says, and that they're not in conflict, and they're not trying to omit anything important to your reader. So that's the big picture in terms of using individual visual information. All right. Now what I want to do is get even step back to another step to the bigger issue of the page. As you are creating a document, what the page looks like. All right? Because really, as you write a page of text that includes visuals, or even one that doesn't include visuals, what you are doing is creating a look that your audience is going to absorb. All right? You're doing it whether you like it or not, whether you want to or not. The way you are presenting information on a page is having an effect and an impact on your reader. Therefore, if the very act of creating the document determines its look, then what you want to do is be intentional about that and to understand that what you are doing is trying to guide your reader through the material in the way that you want those readers to understand that material. Again, it goes back to helping your readers understand and remember what you believe is the most important information. So it's not only individual graphic information that helps you do that, but the entire layout of a page. How the words and visuals look on a document. So you have the power to really guide the thinking of your audience if you design your page in a way that helps your readers understand. So, what are some ways that we do this, that we use page design in this way? It's all about visual cues of various kinds. So, first cue, the first thing that the reader is likely to see is what goes across the top of the page, what we call the masthead. So, if you want to be really clear and you want your reader to quickly understand, you want that masthead to really work for you. You want it to immediately and efficiently identify the subject of your writing and the information source of your writing. So, what is this about and where does it come from? Right up there at the top. All right. So you're immediately, again, it's about focusing the audience's thinking. So by getting that information up at the top, subject, where it comes from, that's a great way to get your reader focused very quickly. Then, and this is something, if you've taken previous writing courses, you will have heard before, and it's still true. A good title and clear headings work wonders to organize and focus your reader. All right? So a title really, really is important. And depending on the kind of writing you're doing, you want that title to immediately get at the heart of the matter. So if you are writing a set of directions, a write of instructions, you want that title to say how to do something. Right? You don't mess around, you don't be cute, you get right to the point. And then your headings under the title are telling your reader, here are the most important points in this whole text. All right? So, I don't even have to read the whole text to know what the most important points are. All I have to do is what we call skimming, or scanning a text. So if I look at the title and I look at the headers, I should be able to know what the key points of your text are before I actually read it. So that's a way to test yourself. All right? Can you, or can someone, when as you're drafting, get somebody to look at it and get them before they even read the whole text to skim the text, looking particularly at its title and its headers. And if your reader doing that can tell you what the key points are, then you're doing a good job. Because that's what titles and headings do, if they're used well. So and that's a great pre-reading exercise, in case you haven't heard that before. It's a great pre-reading exercise to get yourself grounded and to really give yourself a head start in understanding the text. Is to look at the header and look at the title and find out by doing that what the key points are. So make sure you write your document so that a reader can do that. All right? It's just easier. What your goal is to make it easier for your reader to see what your key ideas are that you're going to be communicating, to see how that information is structured, and to see where I, as your reader, should focus my attention. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to use the title and the headers to get me to understand and to know how to focus. And then just some other good, important things to know about page design. First of all, always use page numbers so that a reader never gets lost in your text. Always use headers and footers to remind the reader what the overall topic is. All right. Subdivision of a page into parts. You'll see information about this in chapter 13, and I invite you to go look at it. In technical and like a lot of formal business writing also, pages are subdivided along a grid. In fact, if you look at your textbook, every single page of your textbook is organized on a grid. And that grid, it will be different from page to page. Sometimes the grid will be two horizontal boxes. Sometimes the grid will be 3 vertical columns. But the information gets organized in chunks that are organized on a page. That's what we mean by using a grid. And we do that to make it easier to read. So look at the examples in chapter 13 of what we're talking about there. And it really depends upon what kind of information you're trying to convey, how you want to subdivide the information. All right. The other thing you will probably notice in your textbook and in a lot of formal technical and business writing is we try to keep paragraphs short. All right. I've heard, sort of like one rule of thumb is never more than 7 sentences. Now, I'm not going to hold you to that, but we want to keep fairly short paragraphs, and we want to have ample margins. Lots of white space around those paragraphs. The goal here is for the text to look clean, uncrowded, and therefore less intimidating. Again, I bet you have this response. I know I have this response when I open up a page and the text is small and close together, and just, I think the word that comes to me is dense. It's just dense, and it just feels like I'll never be able to penetrate this. It just feels overwhelming. That is exactly what you don't want your reader to experience. You want to keep it clean, uncrowded, and therefore more accessible. Like, oh yeah, I can manage this. Manageable. You want your text to look manageable. Okay? Now, I said ample margins around paragraphs. That's one way of using white space, in other words, empty space on a page. Another way of using white space on a page is actually to create areas of emphasis of information. So if you have a couple of paragraphs that you think are especially important for the reader to absorb and understand, what you might do to focus the reader's attention is to indent those paragraphs on the page. So you're actually creating more white space around those paragraphs than around the rest of your paragraphs. All right? So that will, that the reader will notice that right away. Oh, there's something different here. There's more space here. It's indented. What's going on here? Yeah, you're focusing your reader's attention on something that you think is important. Colors. Great debate about colors. Use them wisely. Another rule of thumb that I've used in the past is to say no more than 2 colors on a page. All right? Whether we're talking about text or we're talking about background color, you want to keep things simple. And again, if you're using color at all, you're using it in order to focus your reader's attention on essential information. We don't use color to be pretty or to be snazzy or to make things stand out. Well, I guess you could say make things stand out, but the things to stand out are what you consider the most important information. So, if you're going to change text color, do it for that reason. If you're going to put some background color that wasn't there before, do it for that reason. Because you're saying to your reader, here, pay special attention, because this is really important. All right? And finally, use appropriate and easy to read typeface. You do not use fancy typefaces. You do not use cute, pretty, flowery typefaces in technical writing. It's sort of boring. Your job is to make it as easy to read as possible. And the typefaces that are easiest to read are not exactly exciting. Again, rule of thumb, Times New Roman 12 is considered to be about the most readable typeface. And, you just don't want to mess with that. You don't want to go into all kinds of pretty, flowery, cute typefaces. You want it to be easy to read, and that's what you go with. All right? So, design your page with your reader in mind. Use visuals with your reader in mind. Always with the goal of making your message as clear and as easy to understand as possible. And spend some good time with chapters 12 and 13 and really look at the examples offered there to make sure that when you are ready to create a document and incorporate visuals and really think through the page design, that you're doing the best job you can of making your document accessible to your audience. Take care.